Hypocrisy, thy name is Justin Trudeau. You know, the prime minister that invoked the Emergencies Act because of the trucker convoy, because the police couldn't handle it. Well, the hearings are ongoing on Parliament Hill that looks like more and more evidence coming forward that Trudeau overstepped invoking that Emergencies Act. Well, this is the very same prime minister that is telling Premier Doug Ford that he shouldn't use the notwithstanding clause when it comes to the QP strike. I'm Adrienne Batra. With me is Brian Lilley. Okay, Brian, we know that Doug Ford has stood shoulder to shoulder with Prime Minister Trudeau, and then next day it comes out that Justin Trudeau said that Doug Ford was hiding during the trucker convoy. I know a lot happening here, but Trudeau telling Ford not to use the notwithstanding clause? Come on.
Well,
Hypocrisy.
and then this sanctimonious way that he goes about doing it, saying that we should only suspend charter rights under very serious circumstances. Well, wait a minute. It's not just the Emergencies Act. Look, I think all governments overstepped in their response to COVID because they did trample charter rights many times. Most of those instances were never tested in a court. Let me give you an example outside of the Emergencies Act. His requirement that every Canadian be vaccinated before they could get on a plane, a train, or a boat that goes between provinces. That's a violation of the mobility rights in the Charter under Section 6. And it never got to court because just days before it was supposed to go to court, just days before the government was supposed to have to defend this, they suspended that. They got rid of that and then went to the judge and said, oh, Yada, we don't need this anymore. You can just throw it all out. So look, Justin Trudeau, whether it's the Emergencies Act, his own charter violations through his actions, or his mute response when it comes to Quebec invoking the notwithstanding clause over and over again, it shows his hypocrisy. I think it was Tristan Hopper who tweeted out last week. So Trudeau's worried about education workers being able to strike, but not if they get removed from the classroom for wearing a hijab, which is what happened.
Well, exactly. And to that point about lecturing Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario finally responded to Justin Trudeau's sanctimony.
And as for the Prime Minister, it's very disappointing. The Prime Minister is being selective within certain provinces about his concerns of overturning the notwithstanding clause. If he wants to sit down with all the premiers and have a conversation about the Constitution, that's something he needs to decide for himself.
I think it's a fair response, Brian. I think Premier Ford is trying to make that point. Like, hey, you want to lecture somebody, you should be looking to the very province that has used the notwithstanding clause 16 times since it became part of the Constitution. Ontario, look, we can debate whether or not it should have been used during this QP strike. I know that there's going to be ongoing issues with respect to that, but the very least is that tool is there for a reason. We've seen the kids' scores come down in math, in reading, and literacy. We've seen them out of the classroom for over 2 years during the pandemic. We are seeing addiction, suicide, mental health issues through the roof. Trying to keep these kids in school, from my perspective, was at the very least what Premier Ford and the Tory government in Ontario is trying to do. Justin Trudeau needs to stay out of it.
Look, I don't love the notwithstanding clause being used here, but I also understand
why
I don't
either.
They did it. Is it my favorite thing? No, but we're talking about, as you say, kids out of the school for so long. The impacts of that are being well documented in terms of physical and mental health, in terms of learning loss. This was a union that was definitely going to go on strike no matter what. They made that clear. Give us 50% increase over 3 years or we go on strike. That's not realistic. That's not sustainable. Also, you can't just use old-fashioned back to work legislation because of a 2015 Supreme Court decision that gave a constitutional right to strike. You can't do it the old-fashioned way anymore. That won't work. That's why Ford had to end up paying out $220 million to the unions over back to work legislation that Dalton McGuinty had brought in a decade ago. So this idea that he could have just done it the old-fashioned way, it doesn't fly. But you're right. Justin Trudeau should have just zipped it, stayed out of this fight, unless he's willing to start taking on Quebec the way he takes on Ontario. We know that's never going to happen.
Yeah, Trudeau can just go back to continue to obfuscate as to who stayed in that $6,000 a room night. That story that you broke, Brian Lilley. Log on to Facebook and Twitter. Let us know what you think, and go to thetorontosun.com and hit that subscribe button for coverage on stories like this and others that you will not find anywhere else.